Welcome, everybody, to the Analyst Roundtable, Season 2, Episode 5. I'm joined by my colleagues and friends, at least one, if not two of them, calling in from Vegas. Who's in Vegas?
I am.
Doug, what's happening in Vegas? Are you
Well,
a
there's
gambler?
the APS meeting, which is the world's probably the largest meeting of physicists held every year. It's in Vegas this year, and it's interesting to see the reaction. There are some of the physicists don't like Vegas, so but people work with probabilities and expectation values. Maybe this is an interesting place for them.
We had the Quantum Beach conference in Miami a couple of days ago, and every physicist enjoyed that one very much. I will leave it at that. Doug, I think you pointed out last time that so far there had been no North American deals. We're diving right into it. Investment activity. That changed, right? Big whopper with Sandbox AQ raising $500 million. And we have a little document that I'm looking at here with the investment category. And I think this is the longest in investment category that I've seen since we started this, but Sandbox AQ outshining them all.
Yeah, well, the Sandbox AQ is really a continuation of the original investment last year. I think what I heard is the last of the $500 million they raised in December. So it wasn't a 2023 investment, really more of a 2022 investment. But you are right. We're seeing a lot of deals, but again, very heavily weighted towards overseas, Europe. We had Quantum Motion at 42 million. We had Quantum Brilliance in Australia. I think it was 18 million. A few others. We had MEMQ, Plan QC, and Nanofiber. So a little smaller, 1 to 2 million. But still a lot of investment overseas. There were a couple of U.S. events. Some of them were grants from DARPA and the U.S. government. The other thing I think is notable, though, is D-Wave. And by the way, D-Wave now regards themselves as an American corporation. They reincorporated in the U.S. And they tapped into their equity line of credit for $20 million. So that's a financing vehicle that I think Rigetti has available, D-Wave has available, and may see more of that as people are looking to raise some more money.
And we had Turing Q in Shanghai raise an undetermined but several hundreds of millions of yuan in funding as well. I was hoping to total all of this up for our recording, but of course didn't get it done. I would love your take. When people have been asking me over the last few weeks how I see investments in quantum, I say, the big money is still around. We currently see it more in Europe than in North America or Asia, and I'm sticking to that even after Sandbox AQ. I also said that I haven't seen much early stage and seed funding deals, and that those are really, really difficult to come by in 2023. Now, of course, Doug, you pointed that out. We had MEMQ, Plan QC, and Nanofiber. How do you feel about early stage and seed stage deals in the next few months? I'm still skeptical about them.
Well, the people I talk to say it's really tough. I mean, a lot of CEOs are working hard to raise money, and if those who are succeeding, they're able to do it, but it takes much longer than they expected.
I wanted to make a remark around the Turing Q deal stands out for me on technology grounds. It's very interesting to see. We've seen the strength in the Chinese academic photonic program for some time now, and it's very impressive. And they've really been doing big bulk optic systems that in terms of their demonstrations. It's very noticeable. We're wondering, what way would they go when they went to an integrated photonics platform? And Turing Q's coming out of Shanghai University, and very notably, it's having a special fabrication facility built that it's going to be able to exploit just outside Shanghai. And it's a thin film lithium niobate focused facility, and that's for me very pertinent. When we look at the financing of quantum startups, I think you've got to have in the back of your mind now, what is the envelope of how the whole fabrication journey which is sometimes part R&D still, gets financed. And we can see that there's a lot of support going in there from China behind this particular technology platform, and it's relevant because there's a strong argument that it's the better photonics platform. There are things you can do in thin film lithium niobate with electro optic switching that you can't readily do in silicon on insulator, silicon nitride. So this really could shake things up as we start to see devices come out of this operation. The other thing that very much fits thematically with that for me is that quantum motion investment, because whenever I'm looking at an investment, and particularly you're looking at their spins in silicon qubit platform is what quantum motion are about, and you have to say, so which fabrication partner are they going to be working with? And they're talking about wanting to work with a tier 1 fab, and there aren't any tier 1 fabs in the UK, right? So you have to say, well, it's not clear exactly who they're working with yet. It's not clear how far that initial raise of 42 million can take them down the process of doing R&D in that environment. We've seen, PsiQuantum are an interesting, case study example of how expensive it can be to do R&D in that environment. And so you have to really have in mind, so exactly what roadmap steps are they going to deliver for that money, and how does that lead on to the subsequent raise? And I think that question of where is your funding going to come from to get you through your roadmap becomes an increasingly important one to ask, and really asking, so where is the fabrication alignment behind each of these companies? And it's very different for the different qubit platforms.
David, the fabrication point is really important to highlight, partially because of the economic protection that we've seen relative to AI over the past, frankly, several months. This is developed, and I imagine that it is not a stretch that this is going to come to quantum sooner rather than later. And the idea that for Turing Q specifically, I think this is going to set them a little bit apart because they have their own fab plant, that they're going to be able to rely on that other Chinese quantum startups, wouldn't necessarily be able to leverage, depending on their approach, depending on their funding. The import of tools into China to build these facilities is also probably going to be a continued flashpoint of conflict. We've already seen this with ASML, I believe, for other initiatives on the classical side of things to build advanced fabs, tier 1 fabs in China. And I suspect that this is, you can kind of chart these things to election season here in America. And that is rapidly approaching. So we'll see how that develops, but I do strongly suspect that that's going to be a encumbrance for a lot of these startups in China. The other thing to highlight, I suppose, is it is really striking to see this, amount of investment in relief of what's happening with the early quantum SPACs. And this has been my hobby horse since we started the podcast, since 2 years ago at Q2B. I've been really suspected the idea of trying to take an unproven technology like quantum computing with an unproven financial vehicle like SPACs. And this is, I have to kind of, wave the flag on this one, because it's kind of turning out to be right. And the thing that I'm hesitant about this is that in business, not every startup succeeds. This is true, independent of quantum. Not every startup succeeds. The problem is because of the difficulty of especially retail investors of understanding quantum computing and the economic political and sort of social climate that we're in, is the first failure of a quantum computing startup going to result in a lawsuit because the investors didn't understand what they were investing in? And are they going to turn around and, try to avoid blame for a bad investment, say, this was fraudulent? That's where my worry is. And that's getting a little bit away from, I suppose, the overall good news of investment over the past 4 weeks. But it is a concern that I suspect that we're going to see if there's continued economic uncertainty and if that continues to impact quantum in the way that it has.
James, do not fret. Read my latest interview in the Quantum Tech publication. 97% of all startups, according to the Kaufman Institute of Entrepreneurship, fail. Only 3% succeed. So indeed, but the SPACs were a success. Let's just be honest. Let's stop saying that they were not a success. They did what they were supposed to do. They got these companies a lot of cash and made a lot of people a lot of money. That is the point of a SPAC. Nothing.
Depends on what side you're on. If you're an investor and your stock went down a lot, you would probably not call it a success.
Oh my God, Wall Street is not fair.
Yeah.
But the assumption is that you know what game you're playing. And if you have read through all the stuff that you signed, you know that you probably don't have much of a standing. What was interesting to me for this Chinese announcement was that they actually announced, because they have not been announcing a lot of different things in terms of what's going on there. And because of the selective announcement that is happening, it makes it very difficult to interpret. There's a lot more going on in China with supercomputing and quantum and all manner of technology that is not being announced, and presumably intentionally not being announced, which means that when something does get announced, it is also intentional. So that's kind of a question in my mind on why they choose to talk about this, but also not disclose the actual dollar value. It's like hundreds of million. Okay, that's impressive. But it also indicates to me the gradual, I think 2023 really is an important year, because the investment that goes into existing stuff makes it difficult for new technologies to really get funded. Like you were saying, if you're an early stage startup, you better have something extraordinary and to be funded. And that level of extraordinariness requires that you have evidence that it actually is likely to work. So I think we're kind of gradually moving out of the experimentation phase, where we just had to put chips on all the, since you're in Vegas, on all the numbers and see which one wins. That is also interesting to me. And then finally, to James's point, I think the fragmentation of the supply chain, as I like to call it, but really the partitioning of the globe into spheres of influence is continues to happen. In some ways, it looks like a done deal. So I would be highly surprised if any of these equipment can legally make their way to other parts of the world.
In that line of thinking, Shahin, another deal that stood out to me was actually Quantum Brilliance with 18 million. Of course, that's NV diamonds, and carbons have some interesting properties. They don't have any nuclear spin, which makes them great hosts. They have good thermal properties, not relying on cryogenics. Personally, I struggle to see the scaling and future of this approach, but let's not forget that Quantum Brilliance, which is a fantastic team that we've known for a very long time, comes out of the Parsi Supercomputing Center, and it's all in racks, right? Racks ready to put into your HPC or data center. So how much of that deal is quantum, and how much of the deal is kind of supercomputing or data centers?
Well, I think these government-funded supercomputing centers, I have little doubt that they are under non-trivial political pressure to play in the quantum world. From one side. On the other side, the applications that supercomputing sites run are naturally more amenable to quantum computing than some of the others. So there is that kind of a match built. And I think when you have some local technology that can make everybody declare victory, that really makes sense. And if you have really good technology on top, like Quantum Brilliance does, it makes perfect sense. So I like to see that. And I know there are other pieces of news that are aligned with this kind of a development, the merger of supercomputing and quantum computing.
I'd point out recently there's been 2 contracts that the Barcelona Computing Center has put out for getting quantum computers installed. One is for Kilimanjaro, and the other was announced just recently with IQM. So definitely a supercomputing center is a good target if you're a quantum processor manufacturer to try to work with.
Absolutely. So Barcelona Supercomputer Center, BSC, is one of the leading sites in Europe in general, and part of the whole European exascale project that is being funded around. And I think there was just recently a report in the UK about the future of compute, where there were recommendations to really dial that up in the UK as well. But they're also doing some, they're influencing chip development with RISC-V. They're doing a lot of very, very good work. And I think we've talked about the University of Jülich in the past as a place that is also supercomputer center with a D-Wave. This one is looking very interesting. And I think it's a very significant announcement. The system that they're working on, their Mare Nostrum 5, which is like the 5th edition of what they do. And by the way, their supercomputer center used to be in this cathedral, was just beautiful. And now they actually have built a modern building right outside of it that is also fabulous, but not quite the same spiritual powers, I guess.
One of the things that strikes me about a commonality across IQM and Quantum Brilliance is they're both examples of companies, leave the technology aside, their technology is quite different, but they've deliberately designed their business model so it's attractive for them to sell into that type of supercompute center. And it's really quite a clever strategy, I think, to be, have a way of generating revenue in this phase of the market.
Yes.
It's about having been able to install someone a soaring capability that they want to be able to have.
That's right. They also very explicitly talk about on-premises rather than just kind of wave the cloud flag. I think Orca also has an HPC focus that they're trying to cultivate. So all of that, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
My question is how big that the potential addressable market is if you co-design, co-locate your quantum processor in that field. Somebody who's going after the $1 trillion market, and I had dinner with him last week. His mood reflected the announcement that was just made. IonQ, and they are setting new records in terms of revenue for a quantum company, announcing $25 million in bookings for 2022. And Peter was talking a little bit what goes into that, which I leave up to you to find out. But very interesting, far-reaching strategy. And of course, if you look at the investors in IonQ, which include some of the big tech companies that are strategics in IonQ, you see those channels to market here. And IonQ, if they execute, certainly a great path forward from that point of view.
In their traditional fashion, the press release is a little flowery in its word choice, and booking is not revenue, but it is good. It is good. It is good progress. And also bought Entangle, so that gives them opportunity to have extra facilities. They were early with SPAC, as James has mentioned, so they got the pickings there too. It's important to have good financial engineering as well as traditional engineering, and they're a good exemplification of that. So I think all of that is positive, and but one has to kind of, it's hard to be, really one of the problems of our industry is to be passionate at the same time as you're being realistic. That is a difficult balance.
And Doug, I didn't really appreciate the difference between Python and C++. That's not my cup of tea. I know we're working on a piece on that, and the importance that Intel has in that kind of transition, or the point of view that one might have on it.
Yeah, well, Intel's been working on a full stack solution for some time, both hardware and software. And they released about a week ago what they call version 1.0 of their software development kit. And the interesting thing is, from the beginning, they based it on C++. And I talked to them, and their argument is that although, physicists may prefer Python, if you talk about someone who's more of a classical computer science and brought up in computer science degrees, working in enterprise right now, they may be more familiar with C and C++, and that's one of the reasons they chose it. I will, though, say that Intel also did a smart thing. They have, with this new release, they now have a translator. So you can take a Python-based program, something like, maybe a program originally written in Qiskit, and you can translate it to C++ and run it through the thing. So, they have a simulator for it. Actually, they have two simulators for it. One is more of a generic simulator, and one is a simulator for their quantum dot technology. One thing that was sort of hidden or buried in their press release, but I think is notable, is they indicated that their quantum dot hardware they would make available later this year in some form, whether it's a private beta or something. But they're obviously making some progress there and may have something to offer. I will point out, though, that there's also been other activity on the software front. Quantum Brilliance has come out with an SDK for their technology. Pascal, Pascal's been promoting analog quantum computing, and they came out with an emulator for their analog quantum computer. And then just yesterday, another one that I heard about at the conference, HRL, which used to be the Hughes Research Lab, they're still around. They're located in Malibu, California. They've been working on quantum dots, and they've come up with their own software that they call Quiver, and they've given a presentation on it yesterday also. So still a lot of activity with various versions of SDKs from a number of different people.
In agreement with what Doug was saying, I did think it was interesting that the Intel press release sort of just let that slip. It wasn't the very first paragraph, but it kind of changed the nature of the announcement to me, because they mentioned their quantum control chip, Horse Ridge 2, which was back in 2019 or 2020, so it was like a couple of years ago. But then they also let it slip in that our hardware available later this year, and that's like pretty significant that they would do that. They also have this one API project with their software development that is trying to be the one-stop shop for all manner of programming, HPC systems and GPUs and accelerators of various sorts. And I believe there's some desire to throw quantum computing in there as well. A lot of that is based on C++ and variations of that. I think that also allows them to tap into the CUDA and QCUDA applications that are written for NVIDIA and trying to open source it as much as possible. They're saying and doing all the right things, but it seems like a longer term project.
It is nice to see that Intel is continuing a long-term investment in this, particularly given the sort of circumstances that other parts of Intel are facing. And not to talk too much about classical on a quantum computing podcast, but things like the RISC-V accelerator had been scuttled rather quickly after launch as Intel's trying to save a bit of money. So it is really nice to see that this is continuing. It is really nice to see that there's a practical C++ option for people to use quantum computers. Maybe in the future we'll see one in Rust, but that's it's a different topic for a different time.
I also want to talk about Quantware and Quantinuum that made a couple announcements. Before I go there, does anyone have comments about Google and error correction in general?
Yeah, there's a background point for me that the Google result, which finally got published in Nature. I mean, of course, it's very relevant that we have this process still of publishing in high quality refereed journals. But of course, the result's not new to the field, because we've all been familiar with that result because it's been out as an archive paper and talked about at conferences, since last year. And so it's not new in that sense. And I think we have to calibrate how we understand things in terms of, is something a rumor in a pitch deck, is something that's been presented at least at a conference, is something where there's a tangible high quality archive paper versus as it got to a different degree of refereed journal. And we have to get used to working across these different mindsets of how new is some event. It might not be new, but it's gone down the process of becoming more firmly established as a definite result.
Absolutely. On the chip front, anyway, I think there's a growing trend to announce the same thing literally 4 times. You know, when you announce the intent and you announce that you're going to have it, and we did have it, and now we really are having it, and you kind of tap that many times, and every time you do it, you get some market presence. So that's definitely true. But the results, I think David may have mentioned it last time, or I think what is interesting is the sublinear growth of errors with the number of qubits, and that's interesting and significant in my mind.
There was one point about the Google paper that I wanted to bring up, and I can't take credit for this thought. I managed to find a tweet by Brian R. LaCour between downtime at Twitter that I pointed out that the Google paper basically describes it going from a physical qubit error of at most 0.15% to a logical qubit error of 3%. It's not mentioned in the paper, but it's in the supplementary information. So he's positing that the major claim is that you're going from 3.0 to 2.9%. And so I'm wondering, taking away, that information, is this actually as major of a thing as Google is playing it up to be? And if it's not, then is this the same, rodeo we've been through before with Google and things published in Nature?
Yeah, I can offer you my own personal takeaway on this result. I mean, I do think it's significant in both those ways. It's significant. It is something genuinely new, demonstrated on the industry's flight path. We've always talked about wanting to use error correcting codes which have a threshold, so that as you scale them up to larger and larger sizes, they systematically reduce the error. And this has demonstrated that really does work. You really can do that. You have a smaller surface code patch, you scale it up, and you have suppressed the error more than you had before. So that's new. It's important. However, the other side of it is the performance increase you get does not knock it out the park. And it doesn't knock it out the park because the physical qubit fidelity is only just good enough to get you over that line to make it work. And so because it's only just good enough, you're getting a very small enhancement. And that's just reinforcing a lesson that unless we can make physical qubit errors significantly less across a device in simultaneous operation, then the 2D surface code just has impossibly large overheads. And so it's a great result, but it also is a warning about the need to improve physical qubit fidelities further.
Yeah, the thing that I wasn't happy with was the way the popular press blew it up. From 3% to 2.9%. They're going in the right direction, and it was a lot of great work, but you got to do many, many, many steps like that. But I saw so many popular press articles that use the word breakthrough, and I'm not sure I would exactly use that same term.
And
can I just try and motivate for a moment a little bit more positivism about what Google have achieved? And this is one thing. If I was trying to come at this and I put my old hat on as a physicist, right? I must say my initial intuition would have been, quantum error correction, well, that won't work. It just won't work. And as you try to go to a bigger and bigger, more complicated system, this whole bit, that doesn't. No, actually, of course, very clever theoreticians have been there and done the math and said, well, actually, this really should work. But that's why I have more sympathy for the people that say, hey, look, we did this. And ultimately, I always have sympathy for the guys that get a real device out there and do something for real, and show it actually happening the way it was meant to. And so that, for me, I wouldn't underplay the significance of, so quantum physics works like we expected, but that's not something to be taken for granted.
Thank you for balancing my pessimism, David.
optimistic side, Quantinuum, and another one of these metrics, but it's a good one, increased their quantum volume, and that's for the old Honeywell H1-1 device, from 8,192 to 32,768, keeping with their roadmap. Of course, a fourfold increase in performance and quantum volume, which is fantastic. They do that with 15 qubits, which is the particularity of trapped ions, and a big achievement. And they do that at 4 nines, at least for the single qubit gate fidelity. So great progress. James.
So this is great progress. This is frankly a fantastic announcement. My complaint is entirely in communicating this. Quantinuum is commercialized today. I think by any reasonable interpretation, they are a market leader. A week, maybe a week and a half before this announcement went out, I had commented to some of that. It seems like Quantinuum has been a little bit quiet recently. And then the day that the Google announcement happens, this happens too. And it does seem like that has become a pattern with Quantinuum. And I think it's actually doing them a disservice. I really think that they should let this stand on its own merits, because it's really good. And trying to pin it to other announcements happening in quantum computing, I think kind of downplays how important Quantinuum is as a vendor in this space.
I've got things to say, with perhaps looking both ways on this. I really respect the Continuum Hardware team and the device, and I think it's great that they epitomize having set out a schedule of what they were planning to do, and actually hitting that series of milestones, and using that as they have to focus them on doing very useful things. For example, bearing down or bearing upwards on those fidelity numbers on a continual improvement basis. Absolutely excellent. On the other hand, if I now focus on the other half of the glass, we have to remember how modest this is, really. I think their target starting 2020 was to increase quantum volume by a factor of 10 each year, and that's what they've continued to do, and that sounds great, factor of 10 each year, but we're at a 15 qubit device. So have in the back of your mind, to get beyond a device which is just easy to classically simulate, I need to get to about 55 qubits. Now, it's not quite as simple as this, but if I keep on going at this rate, then I'll get to a 55 qubit quantum volume about 2035, and that will just be and so this is great. It demonstrates great engineering focus and delivery, but you have to remember the modest scale of this device at the moment. But then I equally think we'll maybe get a chance to talk more about Continuum and its early applications. I think it's also got a very strong story there.
Well, let's actually talk about Continuum, the company. They had another big announcement with a reshuffle of their leadership team, bringing in Raj Hasra from Intel, and this is now the fourth or fifth kind of big tech CEO in quantum. Atom computing with Rob Hayes, also from Intel. Scott Ferris at the Cold Quanta Inflection, who comes out of the world of LiDARs and optics, and Peter Chapman at IonQ, who comes out of big tech. So are these just the signs of the time and the typical maturity curve?
Well, I think Raj's background in HPC was notable to me, and also noteworthy is that both Raj and Tony have their beginnings at NASA, different sites, but that also kind of tells me that their foundation in the kind of science and big tech is important. So I kind of was reading it that way. I think the transition from big tech to quantum is going to be easy for some and not so easy for others. because running a startup is a different ballgame than having a high position in a big company. And history shows that some flawlessly execute and some have difficulty. So that's to be seen.
Yeah, but I would point out that these types of changes are very, very common in tech in general. You typically have a startup starts by a bunch of technologists getting together. They choose one of them to be the CEO. He takes it to a certain level. At some point, the board says, "Hey, we got to bring in. We want to continue to grow, but we're got to go to the next level. So we got to bring in some more seasoned management." So we will continue to see this in Quantum, and we're probably all sorts of other high-tech startups, really forever, I think.
I know what was in, I've seen this, what was very much in my mind. I think one has to realize, particularly for a company such as Continuum that's come together as a merger of two quite differently focused organizations, there is a massive cultural challenge. And it's the guys have very good intentions on each side of that, but you've got an organization which had, on the one hand, a different geographic focus on each hand, different sides of the Atlantic, and also organization which has a different product mentality. One focused on a hardware program, and another focused on a software program, on an algorithms program, and they're very different cultures of individuals because of that. So on both of those dimensions, and then layer on top of that, the original and the current Honeywell senior management has very aggressive aspirations in the Honeywell calls for what this venture can achieve. And so that all puts a lot of pressure on the budgeting process about how you're going to share and apportion resources and targets across this organization, which is inherently culturally disparate. And that is a real it's a different skill to what you learn at the small scale of a startup. It's a very much a large organization skill that you have to adopt, and so one can see why you look to different style of leadership to bring that in. But I must say, I continue to wish them all the best and success. But I do see that the difficult challenge it is to budget and target and allocate resources across this type of organization.
We're running short on time, of course. Just very quickly, Quantware promised to mention that, introducing a 10 or 64-qubit superconducting quantum processor. And are they going for full stack play? We don't know, but we do know that two other component providers and different architectures and modalities are certainly eyeing the full stack play. So folks out there still thinking that we might need more quantum computers, which is great. I want to wrap on this one notion, which was the standout learning from me from the Quantum Beach conference that we had the last few days, where a lot of vendors were openly wondering on stage if there will ever be any business value in the NISK era. And specifically Catherine from Google, who's the head of quantum product there, was spearheading that notion. And I think where we came out was that, yes, we can, but we have to deliver it in a heuristic way and probably in very specific optimization problems. Probably not a super big insight, but I want to talk about this heuristic aspect. One of the folks who mentioned that was Richard Murray from Orca Computing, and I had the opportunity to have a couple beers with Richard. Great guy, great team, and expect some really interesting announcements from them later this year. He actually just wrote an article in VentureBeat saying 2023 could 2023, not 2003, 2023 could be the breakthrough year for quantum computing. Aggressive title. I'll let you read that article, but in that article too, he says, if we look at heuristics and very specific problems, yes, there will be business value in 2023, 2024. what does heuristic business advantage look like, and is that good enough?
I think a lot has to do with how you define business value here. I personally see 23 as a year where we build depth in the entire system, that we do a lot of work under the hood and build a supply chain, build the components, build all these advances that are important advances, but they don't translate to here's an application that you can run immediately. So if you look at it that way, that's a lot of depth that's being built inside the quantum industry. And then the business value to companies depends really on the company. If you're building expertise, if you're building know-how, if you're securing your seat at the table, those are all significant business value. If you happen to have an optimization application whose kernel can actually run on something, great, that is business value. I think one of the beautiful things about quantum computing is that it can do optimization, and anything can be formulated as optimization. And if you're having a process that you're exercising 2 billion times, even 0.5% can accumulate. So I think that business value absolutely can be delivered to some companies who really are focused on what that value is, including expertise, including software that you're writing that you could run later.
Yeah, can I come in on this as well? Because this was the other thing I wanted to say about Continuum, because in one sense you've got a lot of people going about saying, oh, will we ever, what are the NISK applications? Will we ever NISK applications? Well, a couple of things on that. I mean, Continuum do have this NISK application, the quantum origin random number service. Now, it's modest. Yep. It's not what most people were expecting, but it seems to me that it's real and valid, and it's running on their actual quantum device. And there's been a series of them moving forward, signing up partners in the market. There's another one just announced with a Japanese certificate authority, and it's real. It's modest. People are copying it. Quandela are copying it. To be honest, I think Quantum Brilliance could also do a very good job of this one. This is a valid thing. It's not major business value, but it is something. Now, the other thing I wanted to say about will we see NISK is people throw this about NISK heuristics like we actually have NISK devices. No, we don't really. For the most part, when John Preskill invented the notion, it was noisy intermediate scale quantum devices, and the intermediate scale meant that there were devices that were big enough that you couldn't simulate them classically. So we don't have that. We've got noisy small scale quantum devices. Now the idea is once we get noisy intermediate scale quantum devices, then we'll be able to play about with heuristics and see if something works. Well, now I know I'm being a bit unfair, because obviously people have really thought about, well, what might be the algorithms that would run on that, and so it isn't so clear. But there is absolutely still, it's very reasonable to say as we get better and better devices, we will be trying things on them, and some of them may work.
Let me just mention something, what I call the human side of adoption. Take a hypothetical case where your R&D team comes to you. You're a CIO, and the R&D team comes to you, and you have a problem. They say, well, we could solve it quantumly, and maybe we can get a 10, 20, 30% performance advantage, or we could send it classically with our well-known proven approach. My belief is that 95% of those CIOs will take the less risky, they'll say, we want to go classic, just because we know it, there's less of a risk there. But there are some people that are, some early adopters, maybe it's 5% of the CEOs, 5% of the market out there. And I think that's where we might see some early applications of this, because some people will take the chance. They like being a novelty, I'll call it a novelty user of it. It helps them with resume, maybe. And they will choose the quantum approach, even though perhaps it might be more risky. So I think there'll be a market, and we'll see a few of those coming out over the next couple of years. I'm
going to keep it brief. 2023 is going to be slow, steady, a little less noisy than the last year. There will be the usual sideshows of trade wars, financial things, and I say this about once a week, frankly. The benefit of my job is that I don't do quantum 100% of the time, so I can honestly go out and say, hey, go look at this. It's going to be a thing. and I don't, my paycheck doesn't depend on it being a thing. So really, the actual answer here is the through line is going to be building a supply chain for all of this, and that is going to be a politically contentious thing in certain circumstances, but building it is going to be the
We thank you for spending another 50 minutes with us. Join the debate online. We now have to send Doug out into the heat of Las Vegas looking for intermediate scale hardware and heuristic business advantage. Shahin, David, James, and I will do the same and try to earn our money. This concludes season 2, episode 4 of the Quantum Analyst Roundtable. Round and round we go.